And we are live.
Great.
Well, it's setting up meeting, so it should be live any second.
Yeah, it takes a couple of seconds.
Okay.
I'll just follow on my phone.
Do you need me to do anything
No.
logistical? Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So, good morning, good evening.
Good evening, good morning.
Yeah, so it's 9 a.m. Philippine time. And Adam, why don't you tell us where you are and, a little bit about where you are and who you are.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for proposing this, organizing it. It's great people. Michael, good to see you again.
Good to
Welcome,
see you again.
Lorna. So I'm on the other side of the world from you guys, I guess. Madison, Wisconsin. So it's 8 p.m. Central Time here. I'm on. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about personality and personality typologies with you today, and I want it to be a conversation. I want to hear. I'll do a brief introduction on what my view is of personality and typology, but I just want to hear your questions, your reflections on all this. So should we introduce each other some more, or?
Yeah, I think as people come in, maybe Lorna, would you mind maybe introducing yourself briefly and why this topic is of interest to you, perhaps?
Hi, thank you, Wendy. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Well, I'm basically just interested to know more about my type of personality. I've always thought of myself as introverted and just kept to myself if I had the option. I'm and Wendy can attest to that. I'm always hiding, according to her.
I know, and I'm always like pulling you out.
Yes. So I'm comfortable in that space, but I find that when there's opportunities for me to be out there and meet people, I'm okay there too. I'm not running away or anything. But this is something that's of interest to me, especially lately, because I did consider myself really hugely adjusting to the situation we are in. In fact, I like it. So anyway, so I'm looking forward to hearing more about it and how I can work with this type of personality, whatever it is. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorna.
Thank you.
And soon I'll be dragging you out of your house again when this is over. So
I guess I'll go next.
Yes, please, Mike, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm very interested in this topic, especially just the title of the topic, Know Thyself. I think it's really important. And I think, understanding your personality and also the personality types can give you some greater understanding. But yeah, I would like to understand more about, the benefits and the possible cons that may come about it. So yeah, I'm interested to learn more about myself and everything else.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you for co-hosting.
Yeah, thanks for that. So we have a couple other people in, Gracie, Iman, Lamis, but no video, no audio yet. So maybe I can go ahead. Yeah, I love like pop psych quizzes and stuff like that. So yeah, I remember many years ago when you know, in my spiritual journey when I was just getting started. And I always heard that, you know, you have to really know yourself. It's kind of fundamental part of the practice. And I remember thinking, how do I do that? Like, where do I even start? Or isn't this who I am? Like, what I do and all that stuff. And so, so yeah, whenever I'm just grateful for every opportunity that we get to know ourselves better. I feel like there's so many different ways to approach that, so many different levels to explore. And yeah, I'm grateful to have Adam guiding us through this today. Hmm. Yeah.
Grateful to be here with you and be guided by you. And yeah, so everyone else who's on, feel free to ask questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Or jump in with
the audio,
audio.
or the video. That's totally fine. The chat is there for that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I just want to start with something Michael and Wendy both touched upon, is, well, the title that we came up with, Know Thyself. And I'm constantly in this tension between like this prescription to know thyself and this Socratic truth that the only thing we know is that we know nothing. Right? So like that's what he said. The only thing I know is I know nothing. And I think it's like meaningfully true. But then we also have to know thyself. And to me, what that means is that ourselves is like the only thing we can know. Like I, whom I know nothing, right? But I can know myself. And maybe, oh, someone,
Sorry.
Yeah, that was trying to unmute.
Yeah, I'm doing it at the same time.
Oh, okay. That's why.
You're muted. Oops.
That was my fault.
Oh, there you go. Sorry about that.
No problem. So another way for me to explain it is Carl Jung, a psychologist on whose work Myers-Briggs is based. He said that we shouldn't try to discover love or God. We should discover the blocks to love and the blocks to God, or, you know, to whatever benign force there is in the universe. And these blocks are in our personality. So it's all about, you know, really to progress spiritually, we must do shadow work. That's another way of putting it, right? The way I view personality in shadow work is particular patterns that we have been stuck in since childhood, oftentimes.
Adam, can I just interrupt you for a minute? Do you mind just sharing a little bit about your background and how you got into working with these typologies? Like a bit about your your personal journey as well, just before we dive into the meat of the matter.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, for context.
Yes.
So I kind of casually, just like you, I love taking these pop quizzes. So I knew my Myers-Briggs type from that, but really I got into personality typology when I studied life coaching or integral coaching. So it was a professional. This was, oh, 5 years ago, I believe. So it was a professional coaching course by New Ventures West, which is an integral coaching school. And the word integral there, it basically looks at all the different ways to approach personal development. And one of them is through studying personality types. So I
So are you a
learned
life
about
coach?
the Enneagram.
Sorry.
Yeah, so sometimes, so I play that role. I'm a life coach. I'm a I'm a writer. I'm basically just a researcher in personal development, and I'm just trying to help people in any way I can. And sometimes it's coaching, and sometimes it's having seminars or lives or stuff like that.
Okay.
But yes, so I've been life coaching for 5 years using personality typology. I started using the Enneagram professionally, but then I kind of went back and looked at Myers-Briggs, and I saw that these two systems are complementary. And I'm sure we'll touch upon the contrast and comparison. But both are good. So if you only have time for one, or if you don't know either and you need to start with one of them, then you know, you can't go wrong. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me. So I've been using them in my coaching practice, in my corporate trainings that I've done, and then the research I'm doing. So personal research that I've been doing and presenting at conferences was on synthesizing the two systems, and what it's like creating a third personality typology that's a synthesis. So that's what I'm working on right now. So maybe one day, hopefully we'll have a live about that one.
So that's still in the development stage, because we talked about that before. That's not something that you're ready to like share and apply yet, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's in the development stage.
Cool.
Yeah, I would love input and all of that, but that's a different subject. Okay, did anyone else want to introduce themselves who joined later? All right.
Ara, hi, nice to see you. Welcome. Did you want to introduce yourself? Let me
Don't
unmute.
feel pressured. If you're an introvert who just wants to hang out.
Exactly, that's fine too. Okay, I'm trying to unmute you, but I can't.
Oh,
there you go.
Hello, good morning.
Hi.
Good morning.
Thank you for allowing me to be here to join your conference.
Great
I'm
to
from
have.
yeah.
You're
Hello.
here in Cebu, Ara.
Ha?
You're in Cebu, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. Oh, David is also coming in, so maybe he will wanna introduce himself when he gets set up. Yeah, that's fine. Hi, David.
Hi, David.
David was with us yesterday when we were talking about ayahuasca integration. But yeah, Adam, let's just give him a moment to set up.
Okay. All right. So I can kind of start with just introducing briefly the two
Yes.
typologies. Should we do that?
Yes, please.
So the Enneagram is, well, I wish I practiced sharing a screen, but if you just Google the Enneagram, you will see a symbol that there's like a mandala that is a representation of this collection of 9 personality types. And each type is characterized by what motivates it, what drives it. And for each of the 9 types, I would say it's like a passion. And the passion can be manifested as what's been called a sin, or it could be like a positive quality. And so each of those 9 types represent one of those passions. And the way I've learned the Enneagram, it was like your personality was in some way sinful. So it was hurting you in predictable ways because you were behaving out of habit rather than making free choices in every situation. And so it helps recognize. So for example, right, type 1, it is called the perfectionist. So it's kind of like what kind of an archetype is driven by the desire to have everything be lined up to their standard. And the sin of type 1 is frustration.
Sorry, so sin in like the biblical sense?
Yeah, so there's 9 types, right? And I think, so the early Enneagram theorists thought that these 9 types represent the 7 deadly sins from the Catholic tradition, and then they added 2 of them. So I don't know how detailed we want to go into each typology. You know, we don't have much time, and it's a big topic, and people can do that on their own.
But how old is this system, and where is it from? Do you know?
Oh, yeah, it's such a great question. So what's unique about the Enneagram is it has this mandala that I mentioned. It's like the circle with 9 points.
Like the one behind you.
Yeah, like that's more, so that's a Buddhist mandala. That's more of a Myers-Briggs mandala, actually. Okay. You'll see it's like symmetrical. So there's 4 main points. Like there are 4 main functions in Myers-Briggs: sensing, intuition, feeling, and thinking. And in fact, Carl Jung drew a lot of mandalas, and he based it on these Buddhist mandalas. But so the Enneagram is different, and it's not like a quartered mandala. It's based on the number 3 and 6 and 9. Yeah. It's like sacred numbers according to the famous Tesla quote, right? If you understand the numbers 3, 6, 9, then you understand the universe. And that I would sell a book on the Enneagram with that, because it's kind of true. So that mandala appeared first at the beginning of the 20th century. There was this Armenian or Georgian Armenian Russian mystic who either just downloaded it from the astral plane, or like he claimed he brought it from some Sufi mystics who have gotten it from ancient Egyptians or something like that. But as far as evidence goes, he got that download. And for him, he taught that mandala as a moment-to-moment path through any process of life. So our attention goes through different points on this 9-point mandala.
So what exactly, the download was the 7 types?
No, so it was before the types. The download was that it was the symbol of any process. So for example, consciousness could be subdivided into 9 points. So he never actually used it as a typology. What happened later in the mid 20th century is that different people took that and thought, you know what, if Gurdjieff was the name of this mystic, if Gurdjieff was right that any system, any process can be represented on this mandala, then it's also true of the personality types. It's also true of the different sins we tend to all succumb to. And so the theory is that different types of people are more vulnerable or more attached to particular sin, like greed or lust, or the 2 that they added, which was fear and deceit. And so, yeah, so we can go deeper into, you know, whether thinking about a sin is helpful or not, or whatever.
It's actually coming from a very mystical origin. It's not like a bunch of scientists or psychoanalysts in a university who put this together, which is interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and the 2 typologies contrast in that the Enneagram has it tends to be more like spiritual. So there is this recognition of wholeness of personality, which is represented by the circle, and that we're kind of on this hero's path from being really identified with our personality to starting to notice some patterns, starting to recognize our patterns, and then being able to intervene before your pattern screws with you again for like 100th time, you know? So, so that essentially spiritual process of transformation, it's built into the Enneagram system. The Enneagram system includes a concept of levels of personality. A lot of people don't know that who just start the
So David
Enneagram.
has a question. Did you just mention G.I. Gurdjieff, who wrote In Search of the Miraculous? Is that the same person?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah. So Gurdjieff, I don't know if you knew that or you just randomly know him from another angle, but he introduced the symbol of the Enneagram on which the typology of the Enneagram is based. So, and I think In Search of the Miraculous was the first book known in existence to contain this symbol. Whether or not it was passed down by Sufi mystics through generations. So Myers-Briggs, it's interesting because Carl Jung in his work, and Wendy and Michael were in the book club together reading Jung. We know how spiritual he was and how, I mean, he was a pioneer in teaching people this very process of transformation and unification of the soul. So, you know, for him, if you were strong in the sensing function and your intuition was in the unconscious, you know, your process of individuation, what he called individuation, transformation, involved seeing into the unconscious and going through these levels of development. But Myers-Briggs were a team, a mother-daughter team, who took that and made it more into like a business-friendly system, which is how it's mostly been used up till now. So they kind of took out a lot of the spiritual growth components, I would say, and so now there is a movement in the Myers-Briggs communities, like on YouTube or well, I guess YouTube has become the best source of that for those.
So Myers-Briggs came later.
You know, the cool thing is that they kind of emerged at the same time. Gurdjieff and Jung lived at the same time. They'll never commented on each other's work. Well, Jung said something dismissive about Gurdjieff because he was in this science ego trip stage. So he was like, I don't deal with, like, you know.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but they developed their systems that then were the foundations for Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram of personality a generation later. So it's fascinating, like these typologies went through very similar stages. And now, you know, for those of you who are familiar with the Enneagram of personality typology or Myers-Briggs, it would be interesting for you to like travel back in time and learn about the Enneagram as a process of living life, and then learn about the cognitive functions as Carl Jung has taught them, on which Myers-Briggs is based, because it's kind of like the community is going backwards to find the original meanings behind the symbols and the theories. All right, I talked a lot. Let's go to the next question.
David has it's a comment. Probably a lot of competition ego trips to push a certain view of humanity's psychology agenda similar to Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison. Yep, always ego involved.
We were talking earlier about how we can never eliminate our ego. And we shouldn't try. It's like a facilitator of learning the truths we need to know to drop the ego and be in the flow of the present moment.
So I have a couple of questions. Like, guys, feel free to, you know, add it in the chat box. But because we're not going to go, obviously, we're not going to go into the different typologies. But first of all, can they be used separately, or do you really recommend that, you know, you work with them together? Because I think David was saying, like, he was saying, oh, is it worth my time to explore this other one, or am I just good with one?
Yeah. I would start with one, and kind of get a sense of it and get a sense of your particular type. And then I would go into another and do the same with another, because they're complementary, but they're different. So I started to say earlier, the Enneagram is more, it gets into your motivations. So, you know, like an interesting case where people who identify as empaths, you know, and sometimes they think that they are highly spiritual, like on a high spiritual level, and they can be, but they do have an ego, and it's an empath ego, or like the Enneagram type 2, who is motivated by getting love from people by trying to help them and trying to be empathetic to them. And so it's such a subtle form of ego, or such a deceptive form. It hides behind the sin of pride, right? So for the type 2. So it helps us see these motivations where it's like, wow, I am a loving person, but my love is conditional. You know, and how much of my life have I been suffering from that? And then Myers-Briggs gets more into the method of this matter? Like, how do you actually pursue your motivations? So this is where introversion, extroversion comes in. Like, how do you get energy for moving in life? You know, do you recharge when you're alone, or do you recharge when you're with people? And then the 4 functions I mentioned, sensing, intuition, is how you process information. Is it through, you know, your 5 senses directly, or is it through some sort of a more abstract process, intuitive process? And then thinking and feeling, and then we have perceiving, judging. So like Myers-Briggs illuminates how we do the things we do and the habitual addictions to the methods of doing things. And then the Enneagram is more about, I would call it the ego. Enneagram's more about the ego. It's like, it's like if you were playing a role-playing game, you know, and you needed to pick an avatar. Like, am I gonna play a warrior or a mage or a cleric? Like, that's like a Enneagram type. And then the stats on your avatar is kind of like Myers-Briggs. Like, what's your dexterity level? What's your like magic level? What's your strength, etc.
So I have a question that's kind of a big question, but I feel like isn't there a risk of boxing people into types? Kind of. I mean, this whole idea of assigning people labels. We've had quite a few conversations, and I noticed how you have this tendency to be like, oh, that's typical of this or that. And I don't know, like, is that helpful? Is it limiting? Is it empowering? Is it, you know, like, how does that work?
Yeah, great question. And totally guilty or ashamed, or you know what? I haven't fully resolved it, to be honest. I'm not like the expert on this in this regard. Like, there is part of me that believes that we shouldn't even be typing other people at all. We should be typing ourselves with the knowledge that it can change. You know, your type can change.
Can it?
Or with the knowledge.
Can it?
Can it? Well, you can certainly test differently on the test. But in terms of like, so it's another great question. Can the type change? I think that it's kind of like, if, you know, if you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. That's like the 12-step program formula. So I think if you're a type, you're always a type. It's just something that gets established by us being humans and going through the particular childhoods we've had, where our brains were developing most deep, like the grooves in our brains are just like particularly deep in childhood and adolescence. And so those proclivities will always stay with us, but our behavior, like, will we follow those proclivities into like making the same mistake for 100th time? Or do we start knowing ourselves, noticing, pausing, and then making a different choice from the habitual one? So it's like exercising our free will. There's like quotes I collect about this very phenomenon. There's a famous one by Carl Rogers that says, the curious paradox is that only when I accept myself as I am I free to change. So I first have to accept myself as I am. Recognize, know thyself, and then I can change. Then I can become whoever I can become once I stop being who I'm compelled to be throughout my life by my personality.
Okay, we can come back to this question because, like I said, it's kind of a bit of a loaded question. I'm just gonna look at the chat box, and Mike's asking, how can you go about starting to work with both types at the same time? If you know both your types, how do you put them together? So yeah, so kind of similar to what I was asking. And then you kind of touched on that. Like one is more on getting a picture and the other one is more on making educated decisions. Is that right?
That's right. It's funny, what I'm observing now is like, this is the question about the system that I'm developing, right? And so this is an opportunity for me to like really,
yeah, so can you tell us about that?
yeah, but my ego is like, oh my God, this is like a test of your system. So I'm just aware of it. Like my type 5 Enneagram being like, ooh, but it's not ready yet. Like I haven't perfected the formula of how the two personality typologies go together. So I shouldn't bring it out into the world. So because I guess I noticed that, maybe I can address it in some sort of a useful way. So the way to put them together, I think, is by going back to the origin of these typologies, where Myers-Briggs is based on Carl Jung's 8 cognitive functions. So these are sensation, intuition, thinking, feeling, and each of them can be either extroverted or introverted. And so I don't know if there's time to go into what that means. So just basically know that Myers-Briggs personalities, the 16 personality typology, is based directly on those 8 cognitive functions. And number 8 is very close to number 9, which is the number of Enneagram types. And so you can actually place each of those 8 cognitive functions that Carl Jung identified on the Enneagram. And then one of the types on the Enneagram is kind of special because it's the type whose ego tries to balance all the different functions and persona. And that's type 9, the mediator, right? So it's kind of corresponds to this one function of consciousness that Carl Jung missed. And so once you do that, you kind of get a new perspective. So for me as a coach, I get a new perspective on where is my client stuck. So like, if they're type 5, it might be that their cognitive function of extroverted sensing is undeveloped, which in plain English means like maybe they should go take a soccer class or something, like practice, meditate on being in nature. So like be more in your body, be more in your senses. So the way I put together those two typologies is kind of saying that each of the Enneagram types can progress by paying attention to the different cognitive functions, which the Myers-Briggs sets you up to understand. Michael, please feel free to feedback if that answered your question.
Oh yeah, that really answered my question, and it also kind of helped because I understood. I didn't understand that about type 9, which I am. So I didn't know that it touches a little of all 8 of the other enneagrams.
Oh
Did
yeah,
you know he was a type 9? Is that why you mentioned it?
Sorry?
Did you know he was a type 9?
I did know that he was a type 9. It's not why I mentioned it. I mentioned it because but yeah, like we can talk about it later too. You will enjoy what I see as the specialness of type 9, if only because the genius of Carl Jung didn't really identify it, even though he identified all the others.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. But yeah, I did answer my question. Thank you.
I have a question about, do you find any correlation with the zodiac, the signs of the zodiac?
oh my God, I was like, so I am INTP, and finding correlations is like is what my personality sustains itself on.
So not
And
a dumb question.
no, not at all. And the reason I was trying to correlate it to astrology was because um, I was also correlating these different archetypes to ancient Greek gods, like the pantheon of gods, you know, like type 8 for the Enneagram, who's the challenger, is kind of like reflected in the myth. Yeah, right. Is reflected in the myth of Ares, the god of war, or Mars, and Athena, because I guess goddess of war, the two faces, feminine and masculine of war. That's the way I saw it. And, you know, Mars made it, or Ares made it to the zodiac, Athena didn't, but I was basically just trying to see if there's an astrological system, because it was, yeah, it was lining up on the divine archetypes. But anyway, my answer is that even my INTP brain has not managed to come up with like a defensible correlation, which I
Yeah,
think is really good. Like I this is
it's
another,
evil. I mean,
it's good. Different systems are about different things. Like all models are wrong, all theories are wrong. So but some are useful.
yeah,
So and we can't predict how they're going to be useful, to be honest. Like that's the honest answer to the earlier question. Like you're guaranteed to learn something about yourself that's going to
yeah.
propel you
And
if you
then,
do the Enneagram, and also if you do the
yeah,
Myers-Briggs, and also if you learn the Zodiac.
yeah.
Yeah, but and what it's going to be, we can't predict, but it's going to be something. So
So what do you, I'm thinking of this, the trap of the like self-fulfilling prophecy when you over-identify with your typology. Like, for example, if I read, a typical description of an Aquarius and they're, rebellious and forward-thinking and yada yada, and then like, okay, that's me, so that's how I'm gonna act. Like, so it goes back to my initial question about the over-identifying with the labels. And actually, David has a similar question here, or comment. Danger is attaching to some labels. Yeah, like stereotyping. So how to leverage the MBTI and Enneagram in the best way possible to be empowered without falling into that trap, I guess. And how you personally, how is it empowering you? Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's always good to talk about personal experience.
yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
I'll
David.
just start with that. Thank you. Great questions. The last one, like, uh, is really stark. We were just talking earlier, Wendy and I, about how I was saying, like, I am at the point where my very first instinctual thought about something I don't trust, because I know it's coming from, like, I've learned that it's coming from ego, from personality, from some conditioned pattern. And so just like my saying, okay, don't believe my thoughts, just like me knowing that I shouldn't believe my thoughts automatically, it helps me disidentify from those thought patterns, and gives me the ability to, make better choices in life, make different choices in life. And so at this point, frankly, I don't use, like, I'm not for myself using personality that much. But I've built up this, basically, I had to learn personality to learn to see those patterns and recognize them and accept that, like, wow, I am, like a type 5, I do tend to withdraw from people because I don't feel like I have enough resources. And then as a type 4, like one particular example, I noticed I had this belief that someone that I really, in relationships, like someone that I really like will not like me. It's like it was like a belief in my mind, like if I like someone, they will not like me. And even if they're showing interest, it's probably not because they like me. And that belief, which is, I think, a conditioned belief for a type 4. Type 4 is the romantic individualist who doesn't, basically believes something's fundamentally wrong with them, like their essential quality wasn't mirrored maybe in childhood, and so no one understood them maybe. So they develop these beliefs that are based on nothing objective. Like there's no reason for them to be, but you act as if they're true when you're in your personality. And then eventually I've learned to recognize and be like, I mean, it's crazy to see when it happens. Like I would be in a conversation with someone, like someone that I was dating, and I would see something they wrote and I would just automatically interpret it in that negative light. And then a second later, I was like, wait a second. That's not like what she said didn't automatically mean that at all. I had this illusion. And so knowing, kind of in the back of my mind, having a model of how a type 4 behaves, how a type 5 behaves, really helped in this kind of alchemical way. I don't know exactly how it helps, but it helps identify those patterns and snap out of them. And I don't know how exactly it connects, but I know it connects to your other big question on how do we not identify even more with our type once we learn about it. I think we have to really remember the concept of impermanence, which is fundamental to Buddhism, and know that everything's changing, everything's subject to change. And then there's a bit of quantum physics in that, which is that once you observe something, it's likely to change. And so just know that once you become the observer of your own personality, instead of being your personality will kind of magically start changing and shifting. And so you have to know that and not try to, create an idea of how you are based on what you learn in these tests. So yeah, don't become like a proud INTP or ENFP or what are you, Michael?
INTP. Michael, what are you?
INFP.
Oh.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh yeah, it's on my thing. INFP.
Yeah, I asked because of the type 9. I wanted to see how type 9 correlates.
Yeah, INFP and type 9. IN. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I appreciate what you were saying about how being familiar with our typology allows us to recognize what filters we may have in relationship to the outside world. And it enables us to get a more objective sense of reality once we're able to work through that, which you were giving the example of dating and so on. What I find helpful, and again, I'm not by any means an expert, but similar to astrology, there's always a dark and a light side to every type. And so kind of recognizing that you might have this tendency if like as an ENFTP, I can go into being, I don't know what, aggressive or something. Or and then on the other side, I can have leadership. I'm just making this up. I don't even know. So I think that's a really nice application of the typologies. And since the whole context is self-improvement, finding happiness, enlightenment, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I'd
like
like to add something. Oh, sorry.
Lorna, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to. That it's interesting how you illustrated the correlation. To me, it boils down to, especially the last 2 years, I started working with Wendy on feeling and being mindful. I think it all points to that. When we know ourselves better, we're able to identify or recognize patterns, process, and then be mindful of how we respond. And that ultimately calls for, being kind to ourselves, being compassionate towards others. It really is, there's a push and pull, and sometimes when we step back and look, you said something about being an observer of your tendencies. You tend to not just identify with the label. Me saying that I was an introvert, I find that I do recharge apart from a big community, but also I'm a connector. I thrive in organizing community events. That's one of my strongest points. And I use both. And I don't judge myself when and learning how to be mindful taught me how to listen to when it's time for me to recharge, so I'm not depleted. I guess that's how I understood the. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up mindfulness, because it it's kind of like we have the chakra system, which help us be mindful about the energy centers in our body. So, we can have a mindfulness meditation and the chakra system can guide us in it. So it's the same way that we can be mindful about our bodies. We have to be mindful about our thought and emotional patterns. And these personality typologies, in the same way the chakra system can guide the meditation on the body, they guide the meditation on the mind, and they kind of condition that they change, they make your meditation better, I would say it that way. And so there's a real connection. It's like you can't just meditate on your breath and be mindful of your breath and then fix all your problems. You have to be able to be mindful of your shadow, and these systems help you with that. So one of the things that I'm really developing for that is uniting these two, the Enneagram and Myers-Briggs, in the same way that the chakra system kind of guides our attention as we do meditation. I want the same system that guides our attention as we do meditation on our personality and our shadow and our light side, and in a non-judgmental way, which is something else you mentioned that is super important. Like, all the problems of our personality come from two things. One is not being aware of the patterns and or being judgmental of the patterns that we're aware of in ourselves, or that we're not aware in ourselves that we project onto others and then judge others, right? So if we just stop judging and open our eyes, that's all that's being asked of us. Like, we don't need to obey any other moral code, just like discover for ourselves. what's good.
You touched on something that I really like is how can we use the typologies with our shadow work? And I know there's so many levels to this. Yeah.
And well, also, I've seen different definitions of shadow work, and I've seen some people in like the healing community actually use shadow work in this judgmentally negative way. Like when they talk about shadow workers, they mean like dark magicians. So just when we talk about it, we mean what? We mean
the unconscious.
we're sticking with Carl Jung's definition, right? Right, right.
Okay, let me be a little more specific. For example, I'm reading my typology, and there's some areas that I can't relate to. I'm like, oh, this is me, and like, this is not me. And I'm just wondering, wait a minute, is it because it's something that I've denied or not looked at? Which is one interpretation, application of shadow work, possibly.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you what you think about answer your question. So yeah, that's like a great example where you know, well, first of all, when you like everyone's experience, especially with the Enneagram that I've seen, when they find their type, that there's this moment of like, oh my God, it's me. And I'm like, oh my God, that's me. It's like conflicting emotions where you suddenly recognize the patterns that were there in front of you all along, but you just like didn't have the name for them, or they weren't like laid out like that before for you, and all together, and then you see it, and so the shadow lifts even right then, when you first kind of say, oh my God, that's me. And that's actually why that's kind of a dangerous moment too, because you can become identified with this revelation that occurred, and that's when you get like, oh yeah, I'm a type 5, I always do that, and I will always do that, and but I lost my trail of thought with your original question.
That's okay. We're getting lost. Like,
yeah, it's that time.
Let me look it up. David has some other comments here. Sorry. I'm surrounded by INFPs. My God, what does that mean? Even like, like I feel like I'm surrounded by INFPs. Okay.
Well, NFPs are NFs are in the industry of personal development. They kind of, that's where they live.
David is saying here, types are a reflection of our programming and conditioning to a certain extent. Nurture versus nature. And then seeing your type play out in daily life means, the impact of your conditioning on your daily life, hence no attachment to your patterns is the best way forward. No attachments to your patterns.
Yeah, no identification with the pattern. So like knowing your pattern, not being judgmental against the pattern, and not being justifying of your pattern. Just like recognize it for what it is and try to see the cause and effect relationship. Because that's the whole point, right? It's like you see the pattern, but the most important thing is that you see what it causes, and you see what it's caused in the past. And so now when you make a free choice, you're saying like, do I want to do that thing which will lead to this other thing, as it predictably does, it turns out, or do I want to change, or do I want to make a different move? So that's like escaping from karma.
So
Um,
there's a
and
few comments. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
There are a couple of comments on Facebook Live. Renavon is saying there's a tendency for types to change, but personality is relatively enduring. So what's the difference between personality and typology?
Personality and personality type. Well, I don't know. They would have to define exactly what it means because different theorists mean different things.
I remember when I first met you, Adam, I was very defensive with my personality type. And
yeah.
then I even said, I'm changing. Do you remember that?
I don't remember exactly the context, but did I say that that's exactly what your type would say?
No, because I said I'm ENFP. Actually, Mike had to remind me. And then I saw you like cringe when I said that. You were like, ooh, or something. Like, but I'm
Yeah.
changing thanks to quarantine. And then I caught myself being defensive about my type. But anyway, yeah.
Oh yeah, like I had some reaction to you saying I am ENFP 8. Like I showed some reaction to it, but then you interpreted that reaction in a particular way, and like you made an assumption that I was judgmental in some particular way, and so it's like you made some projection based on your type, and then you put it out there, and then we caught it happening. And the crazy thing, everyone, is that we do that constantly. Like my realization is, someone asked earlier, like, what I'm doing now is I'm just trying to get to the point where I drop all of my patterns because I'm just identified with the breath. And when I'm in that space, I kind of reconnect with the essential positive qualities of my personality, and they just kind of arise naturally. Whatever is most needed right now, like maybe type 5's analysis skills are the most needed right now. Maybe type 7's, imagination or something like that, a type 8 strength. And that arises naturally once you learn to get to that point of meditation, like the single pointed meditation, where you drop your personality types. And so,
Or with plant medicine.
plant medicine. So that's actually one way to look at personality development through this integral perspective, is that there's types, different personality types, different levels of personality, and then different states of consciousness. And they all kind of create this multidimensional structure, perhaps, of our personality. Like what experiences we've had in different states
of our
yeah.
experience of reality.
Yeah, exactly. And so traveling through that three-dimensional, multi-dimensional, any-dimensional space is a path, I guess, we've all chose because we're all here together right now.
Cool. So I have one more question for you.
Safe heroes' journeys, everyone.
Is Adam your real name?
Define real.
Is it in your passport? Is it in your passport, your birth certificate?
I was wondering the same thing.
No, I chose it like the people who've gone through their ceremonies of becoming a man or something like that. And
So
for
what
me, it was
ceremony did you go through to get?
so many ceremonies. I think that one was just like I just posted on Facebook, and that was my ceremony, but it was a long time in the making. Yeah, my original name is Evgeny. I'm from that same area as Gurdjieff was from, back in Imperial Russia. is where my family's from.
Nice. Okay.
Are we constrained by time? Are we good? Like, what's our plan?
Well,
I'm good. I have time.
so yeah, if anyone else has any questions, David's very chatty today, as usual, actually. What are your top resources to delve into? And yeah, so like, where do we go from here? Good question, David. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good question, because I'm thinking, like, I got into the Enneagram by going through my coaching curriculum, and we had to read basically foundational books on the Enneagram. So that's The Wisdom of the Enneagram, or if any of you are Christian or are interested in like a particularly spiritual way to look at the Enneagram, there are books by Richard Rohr. There's a book by Richard Rohr on the Enneagram that's exceptional. It's top of that class. But you
Maybe
know,
we'll just post these later.
yeah, I'll post them. Yeah, I actually don't know like good YouTube sources for the Enneagram, because I didn't. But it would be good if someone knows what they are. Post it in comments. Myers-Briggs, and also the websites, like for the Enneagram Institute website, and for Myers-Briggs, you have 16 personalities. But I would say, especially for Myers-Briggs, like, learn about cognitive functions. And there are YouTube channels that are, when you Google cognitive functions YouTube, it'll take you to some popular channels. They're all good in their different ways. And maybe that's a good introduction to Carl Jung. But yeah, let's post links. Sure.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that's it. We can wrap this up. And
I did have a question. I'm like, is this just a passion of yours, or is it something that you want to offer? Do you like offer personal sessions or anything for people that want to know more about the two personality types, and how to get into it deeper?
It's such a great question, because you use the words, is it just a passion, or do you want to offer it? And that's, originally in the Enneagram, instead of saying 9 sins, they said 9 passions, meaning like the passions that rule you. So you're kind of saying, like, are you just a type 5 who is sitting on your knowledge and like developing all these theories in privacy and never like offer it to people, even though they're imperfect but they're helpful? Or are you gonna do that? And yeah, I'm, to the extent that I'm mindful of that pattern, it's both a passion, right? It's both something I in a positive sense, I think this is super interesting. And I do offer that passion to others. So you can contact me for coaching, like a coaching conversation. The first one
so
is
what's
free.
the best way to contact you, Adam?
Facebook.
Sorry. Oh, Facebook.
Facebook.
No. Personal page. Yeah.
Personal page, yeah. And I talked earlier about the integral coaching approach that I follow. It's not just based on personality. There's kind of there are 6 dimensions, basically. Personality is one of them. Spirituality, yoga and meditation, etc. So we approach whatever comes up in your life that you need support with from the right perspective for you.
So how long would like a coaching program go for?
There is no standard,
Hmm.
really. Yeah, I mean, it usually there's a contract that we come up with at like the third session.
Mm.
And so that indicates whether it's going to be, if we get to that point. So sometimes it's 1 or 2 sessions, sometimes it's 3 sessions, and sometimes it's 3 sessions in the contract. And it could be either 10 sessions or, you know, until terminated. It's very, I like to like leave as much free will to the person as possible based on what we discover in coaching, and not kind of approach it from some sort of a stereotype perspective on what people need.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you. All right, guys. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And Adam, thank you for sharing all of your knowledge on this topic. Really,
Thank you.
really interesting. And yeah, well, hopefully we'll have more of these. You guys just let me know what topics you're interested in. And thanks for joining us. Hi, David.
Hi, David.
Hi,
Thank you, Andy.
Sarah. All right.
Michael for
Have
co-host.
a wonderful day, everyone. And thanks again, Adam. Bye.